Hello and welcome to the GP Performance Matters podcast. I'm your host, Michael Teal. Today we've got a wonderful topic. We are talking about the art and science of leading high-performing teams. We have a return guest from Buffalo. That's Buffalo, New York, in case you haven't heard that before. Her name is Katy Bailey, and I am honored to have you in the studio today. Katy, thank you for joining us and gracing us with your presence.
I am thrilled to be back. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your workforce transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance. Well, Katy, we're going to get started here. Before we do that, though, I think just to give you a little props and a little Buffalo love here is the fact that, when we do look at your LinkedIn profile, one of the things that I want to commend you on is you have a strong commitment to learning in terms of ongoing licensing and certifications. So I noticed at the end of your name on your LinkedIn profile, there's a comma, and then there are two professional designations. There's MSOD, and then I'm going to say this wrong, but SHRM-CP or SHRM-CP. Can you break those down and tell me what the heck those mean?
Oh, that's so funny. And isn't that funny? Because that's like the big LinkedIn debate to put your credentials or not put your credentials. So no problem. So the alphabet soup of LinkedIn and all of the different acronyms. So MSOD stands for Masters of Science and Organization Development. So a degree I obtained from the University of San Francisco that sits behind me. And then the SHRM-CP. So you were super close. So this is the Society for Human Resource Management. This is their certification credential for human resources. So something that was part of my life prior to coming into GP Strategies. I've kept current on it because I think it's really important. We work with a lot of folks in the HR function, and staying up to speed with what's happening in that world is actually really critical for our clients and customers.
Well, I was going to say, as a consultative learning strategist, That is a perfect background on that end. So, today's topic and the thing we asked you to come on and riff on with me is really this idea of leading high-performing teams. And so the question I really had for you is kind of what's the fire? I mean, why focus on teams now? What's the urgency?
It's a great question. I think that it's always an important time to talk about teams, right? And team dynamics. But I think what makes right now so unique is just where we are in the world of work. So I don't have direct statistics on this, but I would venture to guess that we're in a point of time where perhaps there are more newly formed teams than at many other points in time in history, right? So if you think about it, we have organizations that have restructured due to COVID or maybe some of the after effects. So you've got teams that maybe are different sizes, organizations upsize, they downsize. Some organizations change their geographic footprint. Some organizations went and changed the location, the physical location of where their employees are. Some of them aren't meeting physically anymore. We certainly saw a lot in terms of talent mobility this year. So people changing jobs and coming into new organizations and new teams being formed and new leaders. So for all of those reasons, and I'm sure some more that I can't think of, we are at a point in time where new teams are forming and they're doing work more quickly, and they have to do it in perhaps different ways than ever before, leveraging different types of technology and different geographic or physical setups. So I think it's the perfect time to talk about what makes a high-performing team and what the leader's role in that is.
I think I could second that. I mean, we've been seeing this Great Resignation concept and all of the tsunami ripple effects that it's had right here. So if we look at this then, let's talk about a couple of the things that maybe you're seeing as a learning strategist confidentially that are going wrong. So what are some of the common stumbles that leaders are making when it comes to leading their teams?
Yeah, no names will be mentioned. It's okay.
Yes, confidential.
Some of this is rooted in practice, and some of it's actually rooted in research. We did some research last year about common leadership stumbles and successes just in general. Some of the most common leadership stumbles that really came to light, this may or may not be a surprise, but communication and decision making were two big things that when we asked people what were the biggest stumbles that you saw leaders make, that's one of the things that came to life. And in the inverse, and I know we'll get there, but in the inverse, we talked about, what does a leader do well, a good leader do well. Communication also came up on that list as well. So it's like the best of times and the worst of times. But, so that's what our research told us. I think in practice, what I hear when I talk to clients and customers, we really talk a lot about, in some ways, the I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but almost like the rudderless ship. Like we have these teams and we really haven't had that moment in time. The flow of business is moving so quickly and we've got targets. We have all these things we need to do. But like maybe we also just need to stop and pause and figure out who we are as a team. What are the goals we want to accomplish? So I always liken this to like, if you were shooting a bow and arrow, like you could just pick it up and shoot it. But if you took a second to like learn how to do it and really aim and focus, that shot would be much more effective. And so when I think about leadership development training and team training in general, it really is taking a moment to pause and say, okay, where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? Instead of just, the ready, fire, aim approach.
I love that. I might have to steal that one about the bow and arrow. It makes so much sense when you're saying that, like the clarity's coming into mind here. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Katy.
Okay.
Is we talked about some stumbles here, but if you had to break it down and use all of your combined knowledge, and I would say, I don't know if it would be codify this, but what would you say would be like, give me like 3 to 4 bullet points of what you would say would be key leadership behaviors that would drive high performing teams?
Yeah, I absolutely can do that. And this
You can do that?
I can. And one of the main reasons why is because this is what we train leaders on, right? So when we bring leaders of teams into our training sessions, we're talking with them about what are those concrete, actionable leadership behaviors that drive high performing teams. So I would love to share 4 with you today, if that's okay.
And you do it. I have got a pen and paper right now.
Okay.
So I am your student and I'm writing things down right now. Okay.
Okay. So there's always going to be an infinite number of things that leaders can do, but I'm going to give you 4 categories of things, under which, of course, there's probably a billion sub bullets. But here we go. One of the biggest things that leaders can do in terms of building and forming a high performing team is the concept of building trust. So obviously that trust and that dyadic relationship that they're forming with the people that they lead. The second part of that, and there's a lot of individual components that come into that as well as the dyadic, and we'll get there. The second piece that leaders can do is creating connection, which I think is now more important than ever. There's so much research right now about people craving connection, particularly in this remote and virtual and digitally enabled world. So what does that look like from a leadership perspective? So connecting the team to each other, connecting the team to you, all that good stuff.
Okay.
Great leaders also seek alignment. I think this is another really critical piece that we're seeing as a stumble in some of the remote and hybrid world is it's difficult to get people on the same page. So your team, okay, you know me, I'm going to keep using these analogies, but you got to row in the same direction, right? So if somebody's rowing over here and somebody's rowing over there, it's really the leader's job to make sure that everybody knows everybody's in the boat, everybody's got an oar or whatever you row with, and everybody's rowing in that right direction towards that common goal. Clearly my knowledge in that area is limited, but
you're by the Great Lakes though, so I get it. There's no problem right there.
More of a kayak.
Okay, so far you've got building trust, you've got creating connection, seeking alignment, and you mentioned 4. Is there going to be a 4th one here for me? Okay.
I commend both your memory and your note-taking skills, so thank you. So the 4th one, and this hopefully will be music to people's ears, it's the concept of driving results, right? So you could be the best team in the universe and you could have all this trust and a great relationship, but if you don't get things done, if you're not working to achieve your goals and work in the greater service of the organization, what are you doing? And of course, the inverse is true. You could be a highly effective team when it comes to results, but if there's no trust, if there's no alignment, if there's no connection, how sustainable is that? How great of an experience or not is that for the people on your team, and how likely is that to last?
Okay, so we've got 4 good things to riff on here.
This podcast is long, right?
This podcast is shaping up here. I mean, this is fantastic. So I'm going to challenge you here. I want to go back to that first one, which was building trust. So unpack this a little bit for me. Give us a little bit of essence of what is coming off of that.
Yeah, so trust is one of those really interesting words, right? You could ask 10 people what trust means, and every person could have a definition of that. We talk about this a lot in leadership training. We also talk about how trust is almost like a continuum, right? And some people start, if you're thinking about it from like no trust to full trust, some people start at full trust and they say, I'm going to trust you until you give me a reason not to, right? Other people might start much more guarded and say, I ain't going to trust you until time and experience tells me that I should, and everywhere in between. So as a leader, it can be really challenging when you've got people all along the continuum of trust. And really, I think what it comes down to are a few key elements. Consistency, right? So there's credibility and consistency. I think as a leader, you know what you're doing. You're consistently doing what you say you're going to be doing, and you're working to form relationships with people. So I think a lot of times there's a lot of work that a leader does on their own. So like, who are you authentically? Like, who are you? And then showing up in that authentic way, right? So being truthful in your words and actions, being authentic to who you are, showing yourself with what we like to call that relevant vulnerability. Those are all opportunities and touch points for you to build trust, to maintain trust, or to rebuild trust if you're in a relationship where trust has been broken.
That is just awesome stuff. I'm writing as fast as I can on that one.
You do know this is recorded, right?
Oh, that's right. I forgot I am recording this, but you know what? I am a student at heart. I like to write things. It locks it in my mind here. There's so many good things there. So unpack the second one that you had of essentials, creating connection. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, creating connection. As I mentioned before, I would say this is one of the biggest areas of requests that we're getting from clients and customers right now, just about how do we forge connection in this, in whatever the workplace climate is. So, but in general, what this means for a leader of a team is, what are the relationships that you are building? What are the opportunities that you're providing for people to connect with each other, both on work related stuff and perhaps the outside of work stuff as well, which we know, form those bonds which help increase morale and engagement. So, even things like the not so great stuff, when conflict arises, how is it managed and dealt with? How are team members developed and coached? How is a leader working to form like a psychologically safe environment or an inclusive environment where people really feel like they can be connected, they can be themselves? And so again, there's that authenticity thread that I think you see come through with trust, but that creating connection, I think it's all about what is a leader doing to cultivate that environment, but then also, again, respond appropriately when conflicts arise, and then provide those opportunities for formal and informal connection.
This is so good. Now, one of the things I remember you saying earlier when it came to the third point, which was seeking alignment, was really just making sure everyone's rowing in that same direction. So good job for the analogy. It stuck in my mind.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit more about seeking alignment.
Yeah, this is really critical. So, and I think especially because we have so many new team members, whether you're the leader or a team member, not a lot of organizations don't have like well documented, whether it's onboarding processes or even just the ability to share information and knowledge. Where is information stored? What is the source of truth? Who and where can I go to? So, and this is problematic, right? Because if you don't have, maybe there's antiquated files or, things where we haven't trained people appropriately on the technology that they need to do their jobs, this can be a huge struggle and a huge impediment to getting people on the same page. Again, with that quick pace of work, gosh, we've got targets to hit, we've got things to get done. It's really important to take a pause and make sure people are on the same page. So this, I think about this in two ways. One is the concept of the new employee and making sure that they're appropriately onboarded. They have access to the resources, tools, and people they need to get their job done, and they know where to go if they don't have those things. But I think about this in also in the area of a team as well, of taking that pause and thinking, where is it that we want to go? What are the things we're looking to accomplish? What are the overarching organizational or business strategies that are driving us to get there? And then the how, right? how are we going to get there? How do we make decisions? Who's accountable? So you think about that RACI matrix, right? Who's responsible? Who's accountable? Like who's consulted? Who's informed? How do we communicate about things? What's our meeting cadence? How do we know when our results have been achieved and how are we measuring that? So really it's all about, I think the key to alignment is communication, right? The key is bringing your people together, communicating with them, making sure that they have access to those resources and things they need to get their job done.
This reminds me a lot of that instructional design challenge of documenting how do you tie your shoes. So there's something you just do normally, but when you actually have to break it down and you have new hires coming in and you've forgotten about, oh, this is where you find information about even what's the division codes, who to contact, what's, how do you spec out a proposal? And, it's going from tribal knowledge to indexed, curated knowledge. And somebody has to be thinking about that. And ideally, it's a leader on that end. So
can I just say, I love that you said this because so in the learning world, what we call this is the curse of knowledge. You forget over time what it was like to be new at something. You forget, and that curse is then as you try to explain that to someone else. This happens in learning too, right? What was it like when you didn't know how to tie your shoes? What was it like if you were a new student on a college campus and you didn't know where the student union was? Everybody was there at that time. But what happens is as time goes by, we forget what it was like to not know. And then sometimes when people come behind us, if we haven't thoroughly documented those processes or tapped into that experience, they're going to have the same experience, which is what we don't want to happen. So that's just, I love that you brought that up because that's so true.
What you're hitting me with here is, as a leader, you're generally more knowledgeable, you're more accomplished, or at least you've been there longer, you've been there, done that. And then it's easier to forget about that and then cause misalignment on that end. So there's so much there. I'm going to have to keep asking you more about this. This is a podcast, so we don't have commercials. We'll unpack this as we go here. Let's talk about the last one though, because you did have 4 really nice points there, and the last one was driving results. So tell me more about what's underneath that.
Oh, for sure. So again, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? So this is often the metric that, teams and individuals and leaders on teams are looked at as like, did you achieve your results, right? Bottom line, we know there's a lot of things that underpin that make that maybe a more successful endeavor than others. But when you think about driving results and just isolating that, it really is simple. Did you achieve your goals? Are you working on the right things? Are you focusing on what's important? When we talk about employee engagement and we talk about the concept of the X model, right, where it's that organization striving for success, and we, as leaders need to be able to equip our people to drive to those higher levels of contribution to help the organization get where they need to go. It's really common actually that people might be working really hard, but they might not be working on the right thing, right? Or where the organization needs us to be focused. And so a big part of a leader's role is understanding, unpacking, and communicating organizational strategy to their employees and helping employees understand how their role or their tasks or their projects fit into that larger strategy. So that's a huge piece, I think, of leadership behavior that can really drive an effective team. When people know they're not just in the boat and they're rowing in the same direction, they know what they're rowing towards. They can see the finish line or the checkpoint. And I think it's really the leader's job to be at the forefront there and translating that for them.
Oh, and I can see that as a leader saying, okay, there's a clear line between just activity and results, and here are the type of things that we really need to prioritize in a work week. And let's say, are you trending that way, and really just seeking that clarity. Is that fair to say?
It is. And I like that you use the term clarity. I mean, we hear a lot about like accountability, and that's a fine word. It can carry some weight sometimes, but I think, just that clarity. And then also I think the understanding of like right now, there's a need to be agile, right? Sometimes those goals and priorities change. Sometimes the wind shifts and we got to row in a different direction. Oh, that's sailing, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Okay, so you've done a nice job of really breaking down a lot of things. We've talked about results here, so let's think about what leaders can take from this insight and translating that into action. So how, in your mind, can leaders improve on these specific behaviors? And specifically the things for me that I had down were trust, connection, alignment, and results. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
What are some first steps?
Ooh, yeah. I think a really first important step for leaders is understanding what is their current baseline in these areas and really taking an honest assessment of where they are and how they're performing. And I think there's a variety of ways to do that, both formalized and informal. Um, so one of the things we do, we have a leading high performing teams course. And one of the things that we do is actually have a leader self-assess themselves on these 4 components. And then they get feedback from their team. And so they can really take this snapshot of, hey, how do I think that I'm doing right now? How does my team think that we're doing in these same areas? And then compare and look at those alignment and gap areas, which can be a very valuable experience for a leader. Absent that, again, I think some of the keys lies in some good self-analysis and some good communication. If you want to know what's happening on your team, ask. If you're working towards building trust, maybe trust has been broken. I think there's a piece where leaders can come and when they really think about being authentic and setting forward, what's their vision for the team? I know we may not be there right now, but my goal is that we have a team where we trust each other, we communicate, we connect with each other, and we have this, safe and productive environment in which we get our work done. Let's get there together. So I think there's a vulnerability sometimes that leaders can show that can actually help and help people bring along with them, because I don't think the onus is necessarily all on the leader in that regard.
Right. You know what you're saying, and this is totally going to be so crazy out of my mind.
Okay.
You might be going, where's Mike going with this?
I'm ready.
But one of the things that you're talking about here is, as a leader, is being authentic. And even when you're off track, this reminds me of something, this is about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but Domino's Pizza relaunched a campaign about 5 or 6 years ago where they admitted in their commercials, these were the problems. They would show quotes of people saying, your pizza tastes like cardboard. The sauce is terrible. Your deliveries, I don't ever know when the pizza's coming. And, one of the things, it's almost that mea culpa type concept. It was, we've listened to you. Now we want to do something about it. Here's what we've done. And they've had a pretty big turnaround as a business on that side. So if you are a Domino's executive and you're listening to this, give GP a call. We're tuned in to you here. But everything you're saying, I've seen in practice, and I can also see that as a leader, that if you say, here's my vision, here's where we want to go, we're not there yet. What do we as a team need to do to get there? You're going to get a lot of buy-in, aren't you?
Again, 2 things. One is it reduces the onus on the leader as having to be this sole source of knowledge. That's not necessarily true. And when you bring people with you and you involve them in the process, you create that buy-in. So I love that example that you brought forward. And I think that brings up just another quick important point is sometimes we can use things like surveys, like engagement surveys or employee feedback surveys or exit interviews or whatever as a great excuse or opportunity to bring people together. Hey, it seems like we're doing great on communication. It looks like we need to improve on our resources. Let's talk about that. What does that look like? And let's set that as our goal for the next quarter. So we can actually, employ or equip leaders to use those data points to drive conversation with their employees.
Right now, this is kind of more of formal leadership. I mean, how would you translate this to more ad hoc teams or, ready-made project teams? What are some thoughts on that?
Oh, great question. This is so big with our clients. So what it's like, well, we need a program for informal leaders, or we need a program for matrix leadership. And we need, and you know what the best part is? It's pretty much all the same skills, right? The difference, there's literally one difference. It's positional authority. And that's fine, right? So sometimes a leader of a project team or a leader of an ad hoc team or a committee or even an employee resource group or whatever the gathering of folks might be may lack that formal positional hierarchical authority that the traditional manager-employee relationship contains. That doesn't necessarily mean that any of the leadership behaviors are actually different. So I think there's a piece of, we talk about influencing without authority. Yeah, that's a little bit different than influencing with authority. But some of those key pieces like authenticity, effective communication, relationship building, and trust, that is all the same. It's a Venn diagram with a very tiny, outsides and a super big core middle where it's whether your team is formal or informal. There are a lot of commonalities between the leadership behaviors that people can do.
Well, and I ask that because at GP, we are a team of 4,200 plus global employees, and it is almost kind of like what was it? The Super Friends from, you might be a little too young to remember the Super Friends, but from the
Uh-uh.
early 80s, there
Nope.
was
Nope.
Aquaman and Superman and Green Lantern, and they
Oh
would they
no.
would occasionally join up to tackle a job. And I feel like that's us at GP is, there's projects that'll happen and you'll pull in somebody from the media team, somebody from, leadership development, and you've got these ad hoc teams where it's not formally,
Yeah.
Katie is the leader here. You've got, five or
Yes.
six peers that have superpowers in their own world. And everything you're saying right now is I'm like, hey, those things could really work in just a team. Maybe if it's a team that's put together for a proposal and it's a 2-week team, but everything
Mhm.
you're saying would lead to drive greater results there. So thank you for sharing on that. Such good stuff, Katie. So let
Great
me
call.
ask you
Yeah.
this in
Mhm.
terms of this concept. If we have these ad hoc teams and you're thinking about this, we've got leaders, but what can team members do to further boost this overall leadership concept?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question because I think, again, we fall into the trap sometimes of thinking that the leader has, the sole responsibility for driving the team. And that's not true, right? Just like we say about career development, just like we say about employee engagement, this is everybody's job. And before I launch into that, I just want to say what you were talking about, some of those temporary or shorter term or ad hoc teams.
Mm-hmm.
I got two things for you. Ready? Goal clarity and role clarity. Bam. If
Hmm.
people know what they need to achieve and they know who's responsible for achieving it, especially for those shorter term things, that to me, that is like when it gets down to it, and it's like, yeah, you got to drive those results pretty quickly. You got to get that proposal in, you got to get that presentation done, whatever it might be. Goal clarity, role clarity, and go. So definitely, I think for those shorter term teams, that's something to keep in mind. But again, it's everybody's responsibility, and so it might be the leader's charge to seek alignment for the team and to chart that direction. But if you're a team member and you don't know, there's also a responsibility incumbent upon you to ask, right? If there is a policy that's set forth that you don't understand, if there is, maybe a break in morale or a budding conflict, what are the roles that you have as a team member to address that, to mitigate that, to, reflect what you've decided in terms of your
Right.
core values or ways of working as a team together. I think every person on the team has a responsibility and an ability to be able to serve in that capacity.
And to your point there, if you're talking about goal clarity and role clarity, which sounds like a great T-shirt, by the
I
way,
just made
I'm just
it up. I
saying.
don't know.
I
Yeah.
know. Seriously, you got a gift there. Let's get a screen printer and let's start knocking off T-shirts. But it sounds like if you're saying as a leader, you could help your team by saying, "Here's your role. We want you to speak up. If you see something, say something. If we're tracking wrong, don't suffer in silence. Right?
Yeah.
Let's speak up and be honest." And that would be setting that environment, which was right
Hmm.
up there at the
Hmm.
top. So let's shift this then to probably, I'm going to say, the biggest blessing, but also the biggest challenge of the past. It's hard to believe, but 3 years, if you count 2020, 2021, 2022, it's
Hmm.
probably dog years, like 20 years right now. And that is the rise of remote teams and hybrid teams. I mean, the fact is, you can get so much done at home. You're at home, I'm at home, but everything that you're saying is choirs of angels, all the challenges out there. So there's all kinds of things. So how does, hybrid and remote realities factor into this high performing team leadership in your mind?
Yeah, I mean it's everything and nothing at the same time, right? Because I mean that sounds like a cop out answer, but I mean so many of the core components of what leaders need to do or what the leadership behaviors are have not changed. Leaders have always needed to build trust. They've always needed to drive results, create connections, seek alignment. In a hybrid and remote world, the how is really what's different. And this touches
Hmm.
on, I think, some topics that we've talked about in previous podcasts and articles and, about is if you have a hybrid team where you see some people physically and don't see other people, how equitable is that relationship between people that you see and don't see? If if your definition of hybrid is you're in the office 3 days a week, but home for two, are you prioritizing that in-person synchronous time with each other to do things that are maybe more better suited to that time? How are you leveraging technology? Technology is huge, particularly when collaborating in a virtual world. So, do you have do you have the necessary tools? Does everybody know how to use them? And so and I can't believe the number of clients, like, they don't know, like, oh, we have a license for, they may not even know that they have access to something that could actually make their collaboration and communication experience a lot better. So I think that's a key thing. And yeah, falling into the trap of, like, yes, you can get more work done at home, but not necessarily using that as an excuse to, like, pump your people for around the clock contributions. So that's a great thing that a leader, when we talk about alignment, what does that look like? If I send you an email at midnight my time, that's not necessarily me expecting you to respond at midnight your time, right? But so, setting some of those, team norms, or even, like, some teams even go through a formal chartering exercise, right? About what the communication expectations or, norms and expected behaviors are.
This is so good. For me, the big takeaway there is the what hasn't changed, right? Good leadership is good leadership, but
Sure.
it's the day-to-day execution, the tactics. As you said, the how has really changed. And it's funny, everything you're mentioning is exactly what I'm on the innovation team. We've got a meeting set up here next week to do exactly the things you're talking about. So it feels really good to say, hey, we're tracking, we're doing things, Dad, we're doing things, we're chartering and all those kind of, I don't know if you can turn that into a verb or not.
Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
Okay, so obviously with the Great Resignation, there's a lot of newly formed teams. So let's just say, Katy, that I've been tabbed, and it would be a terrible mistake to do this, by the way, but I'm tabbed to be a leader, and I've got a newly formed team, and it's all around the world, or it's not all conveniently in one place here. So what would be some things that you'd say just right out of the gate, up and running, that you could recommend to help me out?
Yeah, I think for a new leader of a team like that all over the world, you have to see the forest and the trees as an effective leader. And so when I say that, I think about the forest, like, again, those overarching outcomes, goals, the role of the team in the greater organizational initiatives, what you're expected, all the tactical nuts and bolts and some of the theoretical stuff as well. But the forest is made up of trees. Those trees are your people. So who are they? So I think sometimes as leaders, we tend to have a bias to launch into action. And I think that can be a mistake. I think we need to launch instead into connection. So the ability to get to know people, to build their trust, to understand, and this can pay off in a variety of different ways. So I think, leaders can learn a lot about their people, not just about, as I like to say, what makes them tick and what ticks them off, but also what they're good at, right? So you may have a hidden gem that you never even knew. Wow, you're great at, podcast guesting or whatever, and then they become, your go-to podcast. I'm not saying about me personally, but
hint.
No, but what are the skills and interests of the people on your team? And this is another question we ask in our engagement survey. People consistently say, I want more opportunities to do what I do best. As a leader, do you even know what that is? And is what someone does best, is that what they really want to be doing? Or are there other things that could potentially stoke their fire? So I think it's that bias, it's balancing connection and action, but really as a new team, getting to know the people individually. So your trees, seeing that forest, and then I think some formal pieces like, how are we going to communicate with each other? Potentially going through a chartering process. What are our goals, mission, vision, ways of working, I think can be really valuable.
That's so interesting. Now, let me just give you a little slight nuance on that. So we're going to put a little lemon in that. Okay, if you're a leader and you're coming into an intact team, so truly it's not an all new team, you're the new kid on the block, to use a reference from the late 80s.
Now that one
any nuance changes? Okay, you got that one. Good. What would be something you would say would be a slight twist to what you've just talked about?
Yeah, I think there's still that need to communicate with people. I would say for a leader coming into an intact team, it's the old 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen, there's a lot that your people can teach you. So I think, again, the leader should not come in necessarily thinking that they have to know everything, they have to solve everything, even if they come into a dumpster fire, right? Even if they've been brought in to solve some significant problems. One of the most important things a new leader can do, or a leader of an intact team, is listen to their team members, ask thoughtful questions, really listen to and care about the answers. And when you do that, those elements of high performance, you're going to build trust with people. You're going to create connection with people. You're going to seek alignment. And then ultimately, you're going to get those results from those people you've built those great relationships with.
Katy, you've been so gracious with your time. Let me ask you one little nuance change to this then. We've been talking a lot about as organizations look to support their leaders in building high-performing teams, but what about high-performing cultures? So let's just take this up to that next level here. What advice do you have for learning and development teams working on their leadership development programs, let's say for the coming years?
Yes, this is a great question. So I think sometimes there's a chicken and an egg debate when it comes to culture. So is it that great leaders create strong cultures? Or do strong cultures create strong leaders? And I think that's a really, I don't know the answer to that necessarily. I think that's a really compelling discussion to have. But I think one of the best things that I can advise, some of the clients and prospects that I talk with is, as you're charting strategy, don't lose sight of the audience that you're working with. So, and not only don't lose sight, involve and engage them if possible in the process. Some of the most successful initiatives that I've worked on have brought in beyond just the L, and I say this with all due respect, right? With just the L&D team. They're bringing their leaders in and saying, what is it that you need? What's going well that we want to replicate? Where are the gaps that we want to fill? So they're doing surveys, they're doing listening groups, they're inviting them to come into the meetings, they're piloting initiatives before rolling them out. So it's a very thoughtful, intentional, strategic approach that involves and engages people and actually kind of builds learning champions throughout the organization, which can be a great way for an organization to start building that learning culture.
Absolutely. Okay, so Katy, we've talked about so much today here. I want to just go back to these 4 key points, just to recap this for those that are driving. And remember, you can always pause this. You can go back and take notes. That's the benefit of a podcast. So the key things you really talked about here today, if we're just kind of summing this up here, great leaders are going to build trust. They're going to create connection. They're going to look to seek alignment, and they're going to ultimately focus the team on driving results. So that's gold that you spun here. I know that's born of the product of a lot of research on your side. Thank you so much on behalf of our many listeners for being so gracious with your time, Katy. We appreciate you.
Absolutely a pleasure. Right back at you. And go Bills, always and forever.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.